I've got a question for you. Do you think a price of £95 is fair for this Sharkoon TG7M RGB? It's an ATX case, regular construction, supports a 360 cooler in the front or the roof. But I didn't mention you get 4 ARGB fans included in that price. So I reckon £95 sounds fairly keen right now. Sharkoon makes it crystal clear why they think that you should buy their TG7M RGB case. They indeed say so on the box. It has on the front I/O panel, we're going to have to stop calling it that because it's a top I/O panel, but anyway, they have one Type-C, two Type-A's. Inside you've got 4 ARGB fans, and those fans have a whole bunch of RGB lighting modes. All good stuff. Clearly, Sharkoon thinks that those are the features that will most appeal to you, the prospective buyer. Let's tear off a few panels, give you a look inside, and then we'll dig into some details. Hefty, tempered glass panel, slightly tinted. Back panel, 2 thumb screws just like the front panel. Thin steel, no noise deadening material. Front panel, fingers underneath, pull hard, risk injury. And that panel I've already pulled off 3 or 4 times in my initial exploration of this case. On the front, a filter, which is a magnetic filter, so no clever slidey in outer. You have to pull off the front panel to gain access to the filter. On the top, similarly, a magnetic dust filter. On the bottom, at the back, a filter for the power supply intake. Power supply shroud is fixed. There's no access panel for the rear to put a power supply in. You have to put the power supply in from this side. And we have an ARGB fan lighting hub, so that controls up to 8 devices. 2 SSD sleds, they can be moved. To positions on top of the power supply shroud, should you wish. We also have a small drive cage with 1 removable drive sled. However, the tower does actually support 2 drives. And then we have 3 ARGB fans at the front, 1 ARGB fan at the rear. Sharkoon has very recently released these fans as separate products in their own right. They are €11 in Europe, so that's going to be $11 in America. Call it $9.99 here in the UK. The maths tells us the case is £95, €110, probably $110. The 4 fans, £40, so the chassis is 55 or so pounds. That's cheap, but it's not dirt cheap. It still needs to perform, it needs to have decent features, and it needs to be good to work with. Let's dig into the features of the case. You remove the front panel to reveal the dust filter, and you've also got a magnetic dust filter on the roof of the case. However, both of them require you to get a fingernail behind the filter. They don't have any little tags or anything useful to simply remove them. And also the front panel, as you saw, requires a hefty pull. Inside the case, we have support for a 360 radiator at the front or in the roof. You can't install 2 360 rads. Let us take this EK slender radiator, 360mm. And there we go. Were you to buy an AIO, it would come with 3 fans. So you're either ditching the fans that come with the AIO, or you're ditching the fans that come in the case. Remember, this case comes with 4 RGB fans. That's a significant part of the asking price. I guess you might move those fans to the roof of the case. That could work. So if you have a 360 AIO that's going to go in the front and you're using the fans that come with, these fans go in the roof. Okay, that makes sense to me. How about putting a 360 AIO in the roof of the case? It's tight for clearance. Let's remove the rear fan. and see what happens. Tight, however, it does go. But those unions aren't in the greatest place. If we put it the other way around, the unions are now directly over the front fans. So it seems to me installing a 360 AIO in the roof of the case is possible. Hose routing likely to be difficult. If you're doing that, I think you're going to be losing that front fan. So supports 360 cooler and roof, sure thing. Don't think you want to do that though, however. Storage. We've seen the two drive sleds around the rear. One. And we've seen you can, if you choose, move those to the power supply shroud. There are access holes there for cables, so that makes perfect sense. The business of the drive tower. There's your drive sled for 2.5 or 3.5 inch. Installing a second drive is slightly more problematic. You need to remove these two screws. Out with the drive tower, single drive really, and then the second drive sits on top, so you plonk your drive on there, screws go through these holes, securing the drive, and then you reinstall, which is reasonable enough, provided you install your drive as you're doing a build and you don't decide to do an upgrade later. I imagine Sharkoon's point is that in addition to M.2 drives on your motherboard, the case supports two 2.5 inch SATA SSDs. I mean, you could put laptop drives in there, but that's not really going to be a thing. So SATA SSDs and then one bulk storage drive. But if you really want a second drive, yes, it's possible. And they've saved, how much money have they saved by not supplying a second one of these, I wonder? Okay, third point, ARGB lighting. You've seen the 4 fans running with the ARGB lighting. You won't be surprised to learn Sharkoon's taken the typical approach. They supply an ARGB hub which you can connect to your motherboard and then control the lighting through the motherboard software. Alternatively, you can use hardware lighting and control the lighting with the button on the top of the case, which ordinarily would be the reset button. And of course, we've seen that approach to RGB a great many times. It means you don't have to develop a software suite along the lines of Corsair IQ. Another thing, this optional vertical graphics card mount, PCI Express Gen 3, there's a Gen 4 version coming later this year I'm told, that's $35 euros, so I presume about £35. You get a bunch of bits and pieces which you don't require for this case because the part is used in both the Elite series of cases and also this TG7M RGB. Installation in this really easy, couple of standoffs. Put that to one side, put this in place. Decent piece of hardware. Nice and solid. Price perfectly reasonable. The thing is, by the time the Gen 4 riser comes out, you have to assume it's going to be significantly more expensive. £50, £60 here in the UK, they tend to be a lot of money. And as a proportion of the case, that is huge. So £30, £95, a third, and then Gen 4 is going to be, I guess, about half. In the accessory pack with the Sharkoon, we get this bracket, which goes in place thus. And now we have proper support for our graphics card at the rear. Let's just slip this RX 6800 XT graphics card in place. And there we have our graphics card in place and connected. Leaving aside the fact it's Gen 3 rather than Gen 4 on the riser cable, there is, however, the point about cooling airflow. Let's just put the glass in place. I can just about get my fingers between the intake fans and the glass. So a vertical GPU installation in the Sharkoon perfectly possible, provided you buy the accessory. Unless you're using custom loop cooling, I think that would be a terrible idea. I'm going to remove the vertical GPU mount, build a PC and check out the thermals. Motherboard is an MSI MPG Z690 Carbon Wi-Fi. Processor, Intel Core i9-12900K, Sabrent Rocket 4.0 SSD, and we have some G.Skill Ripjaws S5 DDR5 memory. For the power supply, we have a Seasonic Focus GX 1000, 1000 watts, gold rated. As ever, we have a load of cables to deal with. Included in the accessory pack is a 3-way fan cable, so we can take these from the front fans daisy chain together, and now we need one motherboard connection for the 3 front fans and a second for the rear fan. I'm leaving the fans in their stock installation, which means the CPU cooler is going in the roof. So it's a Fractal design Celsius Plus S24 to 40mm AIO. Might be a bit risky, would that be the word, with a Core i9-12900K, but hey ho. I could try a 280 cooler in the roof, but that only goes with low profile memory. The Ripjaws is not particularly low profile. 360, as I showed when I was going around the case, I'm not the least bit clear that's a good idea in the roof of this case. So 240 and fingers crossed. And that's the cooler installed in the roof. Cable management in this case, it's nothing special. Why are the only anchor points for cable ties down this front edge of the case? Makes no sense to me. Pretty much anywhere else would have been more useful. And now it's time to install the graphics card. And now we're ready to fire the PC up and see how it behaves. Before I get to talking about thermal testing and what I think about the Sharkoon, let me point out there is a hole here where this bracket should go. As I mentioned before, it comes in the accessory pack rather than installed in the case. The idea is you build your system, you then put this bracket in to tidy things up. Secured with 3 tiny screws, look like M3s to my eyes, and it doesn't quite line up. It's like something slightly distorted. Only out by a little bit, but if you start cranking on M3 screws, something is likely to break. Also, the case fans are rated at 400 to 1400 RPM. These actually run up to about 1500 RPM, so half speed's around 750 RPM and full speed 1500 RPM. Let's do a quick noise check with the AIO fans in the roof at 1000 RPM and the case fans at half speed, which sounds like this. And then, with the AIO fans still at 1000 RPM and the case fans at full speed, it sounds like this. Quite a difference. And yep, the mesh front panel is certainly flowing some air, but the consequence is the system sounds quite noisy if you crank up the fan speed. Thermal results. With the system running a combination of Cinebench R23 and TimeSpy stress test, at the wall it is drawing 665 watts, CPU 250 watts, GPU 255 watts. Thermal results, not great. I'm going to put the blame here, if blame is the correct word, on the MSI motherboard, which is really pouring some juice into the CPU. So the CPU was running at 94 degrees with the fans at half speed and 91 degrees with the fans at full speed. If you were to put 20 or 30 watts less into the CPU, it would make a difference. The case, it performs reasonably well. You can see the mesh front. It's got a decent number of fans. The fans appear to work reasonably well. They're not particularly fast, but they're doing an okay job. Let's get to the pros and cons. Pros, the good points. 4 ARGB fans are included. Or put it another way, if you're not after ARGB fans, this case is probably not one for you. The price is quite reasonable when you factor in those fans, £95 here in the UK. Yup, that's fine. It's not super special, but it's okay. And the ARGB lighting control works well. This is running on the MSI Mystic Light software. I'm perfectly happy. I've been through a number of different patterns. They're okay. The rainbow lighting actually I quite like. The hardware control, we've seen that so many times now. If it didn't work, it'd be a complete shocker. It's absolutely fine, and that little hub, it controls plenty of devices. That's all good. Cons. Cable management is fairly basic. You've seen around the back, there's no clever channels or any such. You just put the cables in place and try and strap them down. And Sharkoon does not really help you particularly in that respect. The front panel requires a hefty pull to remove it. Now, if this was just something you did once when you built your system, that might not be the end of the world. But every so often you're going to have to access that front filter, and it's not a great experience. A 360mm cooler in the roof, it's a tight fit regardless of which way around you put it. It's one of the features of this case is the support for the 360 cooler, and in practice is borderline. Installing a second storage drive in that drive tower down the bottom is approaching hard work. Not the end of the world, but clearly this is a cost-cutting measure by Sharkoon. How much money can they have saved? You'd think pennies. On the other hand, perhaps you don't care. Perhaps one hard drive is one more than you even want in the first place. But it is something to bear in mind. And the vertical GPU option doesn't make a lot of sense, particularly that glass panel. You'll have to factor in the cost of either the Gen 3 or when it comes the Gen 4 riser, and then you're putting glass up against your graphics card. So unless you go on custom loop with the vertical riser, I'd stay well clear personally. And a custom loop build in this case, that would seem like complete overkill. So to sum up, the Sharkoon, it's done a perfectly reasonable job. It's relatively generic. It's not offering anything we haven't seen many times before, but it's okay.